Check that out, eh? When you want to succeed, as bad as you want to breathe, then you'll be successful. It's actually very good advice. Now, if people were to ask me what would the number one greatest single piece of information or advice be as it relates to training to build muscle, it would be this. To promote maximal growth or development of any muscle throughout its entirety, one must recruit and fatigue as many of the muscle fibers that make up that muscle as possible. To add on to that, without overworking your body's capacity to recover. And I wrote here, drop mic, exit stage. My vision when presenting valuable information like this has always been to, fill up an auditorium full of people. People pay like $100 a ticket. They're waiting outside for hours in the cold. Then they all cram into the auditorium. I walk out on stage. I drop that fucking bomb of knowledge on their candy asses. Drop the mic, walk off stage, middle fingers in the air. But in this case, people will not have gotten their money's worth, not because that's not the most valuable piece of information, because it is, but because they can easily misinterpret it. There are different types of fatigue. So when we talk about recruit fatigue, we got to clarify what we're actually talking about. Now, as far as types of fatigue, there's two types, muscle fatigue and movement fatigue. Muscle fatigue can be seen as local exhaustion, movement fatigue as global exhaustion. We'll abbreviate that to LE and GE. Now, as far as movements are concerned, there's two classifications of movements. There's isolation movements and there's compound movements. Isolation movements will provide local stimulation and compound movements will provide global stimulation. We'll call them LS and GS. Now, logic would suggest that local stimulation can promote local exhaustion and global stimulation can promote global exhaustion. Now, also, local stimulation can provide global exhaustion, but global stimulation cannot provide local exhaustion. I'll get to that in a second as to why that is. Now, one of the things I want to talk about real quick is, let's take a compound movement like the bench press, right? When with the bench press, the primary muscles involved are the chest, the shoulders, and the triceps. So you will not fully exhaust any of those three muscles, which is why global stimulation cannot provide local exhaustion. And why local stimulation can provide global exhaustion is because instead of doing that one exercise that targets those three muscles, you could do three separate exercises that target those muscles individually to exhaust them. So that's how you'd use local stimulation to promote global exhaustion. Will it be the same effect? Probably not. But the good news is we don't live in a world where it's either or. You could do both. You could do compound movements and isolation movements. Now, as it relates to why a global stimulation movement cannot provide local exhaustion, there's two reasons. Number one, no single muscle is fatigued. So when you perform that same bench press, when you get to failure, the reason is not because the chest is fully exhausted or the shoulders or the triceps, but rather that the sum of the involved muscles can no longer meet the demand required to perform another repetition. And number two, what happens is if you try to push yourself to exhaustion when performing a compound movement, your body's going to try to take the path of least resistance and it's going to compensate. And compensation lowers the demand on the muscles as they fatigue. So what happens with the bench press is as the chest is fatiguing, the body will compensate. It'll take stress off the chest, put it onto other muscles to help meet the demand. And as a result, you're actually lowering the demand placed on the chest. It's not doing more work, but rather less work. So this needs to be taken into consideration by anyone trying to build muscle, because to promote maximal growth of any muscle throughout its entirety, one must recruit and fatigue as many of the muscle fibers that make up that muscle as possible. And you're not going to be able to do it with a compound movement that provides global stimulation. That will only globally exhaust your body, and trying to take muscles to fatigue when doing that can easily overwork your body's capacity to recover, but at the end of the day, so can everything else. At this point in time is when I would drop the mic, walk off stage, middle fingers in the air, because I will now feel and believe in my heart that people will have gotten their money's worth. But since I'm not in an auditorium, you didn't pay $100 for this information, it's fucking free, I'll end it with my traditional outro. You like the information? Feel free to share it. Click the fucking button at the bottom, subscribe to the channel, support me, and I'll keep bringing you the absolute best information you're going to find anywhere, period, as it relates to training to build muscle through your efforts.